Sound and data.
We have another podcast on the Sound and Data channel for Creative Disturbance, and I'm talking here to Mike Winters. As soon as I close my calendar, there we go. And unlike the other two, where I completely mispronounce people's names, Florian and Margaret or Meg, I don't know, for some reason I called her Schindel instead of Shadell or whatever. Anyway, it's an ongoing theme for me, I guess, with all of these, so I have to get that out of the way. So, Mike, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and the relationship of your ideas about sonification to affective computing?
Sure. So I just finished up my master's in music technology at McGill University, working with Marcelo Wanderley, and I've started my PhD here at Georgia Tech Center for Music Technology in Atlanta. So I got a really nice background at McGill, working with a lot of really nice researchers, a lot of research on perception and music cognition and auditory pathways. And but also I've been doing sonification for since about 2011, and to me, one of the best places where sonification and music come together is basically in the case of emotion. This really tricky data type, which brings all these questions of objectivity and subjectivity in data to the foreground.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of references in the papers, which we'll try to attach to the written part of the article when it's published. But these references to a whole area of affective computing about emotion that I wasn't that aware of, and it really informs. I mean, I called it, I think, in an email to you, the Venn diagram of the crossover between sonification and music. Right? I mean, it's you can't help it, even if you do stuff that's just straight on. Direct audification of data, you still get people reacting to it on some sort of emotional level. Usually horror film related, but
yeah. I mean, emotion for sure. That's I wouldn't say so. The aesthetic part of sonification is a thing, and then the emotional part. And I think good sonifications with a lot of popular appeal often sort of somehow engage this emotional part as well. But the affective computing part comes in because of the fact that emotion is actually being treated as a data type. That is to say, emotion is being measured. And so you have the existence of emotion as this dimension space, arousal and valence. And you can say this person is feeling X is 4, Y is 3. And sort of these sorts of things, and that quantization of emotion makes an objective and reproducible mapping strategy of emotion possible.
So that's consistent across the population, or how does culture fit into that?
Many ways.
Right.
So it probably most explicitly in the reception or the ability to perceive a sonification of emotion. If you're creating a sonification of emotion using cultural cues such as mode, major and minor, that may be exactly, that may be very effective for Western listeners, but you don't know that that's going to work for listeners who don't have a background in Western music.
One of the most interesting things I heard relative to that, and I thought of it when I was reading your article, so I forget where I read this, but they played Bernard Herrmann's shower scene from Psycho, that thing, and for some Bushmen of the Kalahari, and they just thought it was like a bird cry. It didn't strike terror in them at all. It just sounded to them like it wasn't scary. It didn't have any scary connotation. It wasn't emotionally charged or anything. But for us, of course, it has this real. And this is having worked with the hub for a long time. So we basically, without even like saying this, but we're sonifying the network a lot of the time, and it's interesting to talk to people afterwards because they tell you all the visions and all the feelings they're having with something for us is completely procedural. I think Cage kind of brought this to so you're doing something that's basically functional and trying to be rigorous about sticking to the rules you've set up for the piece, and you're really not in a way, I mean, you end up reacting yourself and injecting yourself as a musician into the performance. But if you're really being rigorous, a lot of that is also just being done kind of arbitrarily by the procedure of the piece. So this has been something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I basically arrived at sonification through that. Actually,
okay.
I'm doing pieces that were procedural, I would say, and therefore had an element of sonification to them. So I'm really curious about these sort of generalized concepts of musical emotion. Can you articulate that a little bit more?
Well, the subject of music and emotion is huge. I just picked up a book on the library. It's called the Oxford Handbook of Music and Emotion.
Boy, those Oxford handbooks, I tell you.
Yeah, they're coming out. Yeah, but suffice to say, that's a very reduced version of all the research on music and emotion that's going around. Not all of that is useful to sonification of emotion. Perhaps considering the auditory aspects of emotion more generally, yes. But I focus mostly upon the exact structural and acoustic cues underlying what I would call a musical signal or a sound signal that gives it an emotional quality.
So you're using signal in the sense of Shannon, Claude Shannon's idea of a channel.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Huh. Well, yeah, this is really interesting because I mean, something that keeps coming up in a couple of the conversations is this idea of a sound object, which I saw you kind of refer to too, which you characterized as a note. I got a kick out of using Dinklang too because I've used that a lot in different things. It just seems like a natural thing because it can handle multiple parameters dynamically and express something about the quality of the data in a kind of, I guess the big question I have is I've never felt like I'm in control of mapping the emotion, of knowing where the listener's emotion is going to go. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So what's some of the orchestration? As a matter of fact, I just ordered an orchestration book to sort of think about this in terms of orchestration, which is kind of a weird way to approach it, but I think it might be a valid one.
There's just so many ways to go about doing that. I think the way that I would suggest is to go off of perception, and so not going after maybe at the orchestral level, like perhaps it doesn't matter if I'm playing a trumpet or an oboe. What matters more is like the general spectral centroid or the speed of the attack or the decay, the articulation. More likely than not, it'll be the loudness and the tempo and these sorts of things rather than or like the rhythmic complexity, these sorts of things. Which
what about harmonic content? Does that play into it or
certainly
more a spectrum or what?
The spectral harmonics in the spectrum.
Yeah.
I think they do, and that might be more of an aesthetic thing than an emotional thing. I mean, certainly they harmonics add energy to the sound. As opposed to just having a pure tone, but having maybe an ecologically valid sound, such as the sound of a violin or a trumpet or the sound of wood being hit or something like this, adds maybe perhaps a more immersive quality or a more realistic quality to a sound than perhaps using sinusoids that don't have harmonic.
Right. That's what made the Dinklang thing so interesting because you can dynamically change the overtone qualities and that kind of stuff. It's called Dinklang because you can dynamically change the frequency of the resonators and stuff, and it's a really cool object. Another interesting thing that keeps coming up is that everybody seems to be using Super Collider. Is that true? I mean, Alberto De Campo, Florian, you, Margaret actually did something with Python, so she's the only one that out of the people I've talked to. I know David Worrell is big on Python too. And I've reached out to Thomas Herman, but he hasn't responded yet.
From what I've seen, Thomas Herman certainly Super Collider. I talked to David Worrell at the last ICAT, and he was advocating for C Sound. And here at GTCMT, I think there's a lot of Maximus P being used. I still use Super Collider, but I think the nature of C sound might make it a more portable music language. So for mobile phones, Raspberry Pi, whatever.
Yeah. So if you're gonna you're following Gil's kind of portable work, right? Gil, what's Gil's last name? I forget.
Oh, Weinberg.
Yeah, Gil Weinberg. I was going to say that, so I should have just said it anyway. Gil does those bugs, the music bugs, and he's really into like sort of almost like music toys, which. And another thing, just to backtrack a little bit, there is a moment, and I keep referring to the hub, but that's because that's the experience I've had with a lot of this kind of stuff in terms of performance and the relationship of emotion and trying to at least get across emotional content in a musical way, was a piece that Tim Purkis did called Taste and Discretion, where it generated these little melodies in FM synthesis, and all the parameters were genetic algorithms. And so our task, as a player, you just had a knob that went from 0 to 127, with 127 being good and 0 being bad. And we're just constantly like listening to these melodies and like deciding whether we like it. And that would kill the generation, or, it changed the genetic makeup. But the weird part of it was that the little world that we were listening to, the little musical world, was just like these, it wasn't like anything. It wasn't Brahms' First Symphony or something. So that's. I still have a lot of questions about the. So I guess I got to read this handbook. that I just found out about.
Yeah.
So the other person that comes to mind, just talking about this topic, and I'm curious if he's come up in your research, is James Tenney and the Metahodos. Do you know this?
We read about him in class, but I haven't heard of that piece.
Well, his thinking was in terms of hierarchical Gestalt perception. Mm-hmm. So there, in terms of music and emotion, it has to do with the clustering of what we would characterize as sound objects, and where do they separate? Where does the continuous and discontinuous, come from, and how does that play into an emotional statement in music or sonification?
Yeah.
So have you had success with this? Have you gotten consistent results with your tests on?
So yes. But it's because I'm using computational tools for music emotion recognition. So that's a workaround. So another way that the more ecologically valid way would be to give it to participants and ask them to rate these, and then design again, and or maybe just instead of doing a psychological test, maybe doing a user test whereby someone is trying to convey an emotion to someone else, and they're using an interactive system, and there's a wall between them, so they can't see each other. And what I've used so far is, in music information retrieval, there's a whole push to try to be able to recognize emotion. And so basically what this means is that there are tools being created that will listen to a sound file and give you an emotion score.
Right. I've seen some of that stuff. There's that group at MIT doing that work, right?
There's a few people. Drexel University is doing a lot, and these are really, I think, very interesting and potentially very useful along the line, so long as we understand that these are not actually perceptual tests. We're using derived perceptual tests. But it's a really interesting way of doing evaluation, is to use perceptually derived algorithms. So
how would you characterize a test example that you've used so far in your testing? And we'll have examples to play for the listeners, maybe even cut into the talk. I'm not sure how they'll edit this. But.
Sure. So one sound would be the sound of the Dine-Clank object with a certain loudness, a certain tempo, like it's being impacted again and again and again and again.
So it's kind of like a bell-like sound, huh?
Yeah, kind of like a bell-like sound, and the tempo of this is determined by the arousal, and the loudness of it is determined by the arousal, but also the mode, so using major or minor, and then. And then when you pull into the more negatively valenced, bringing in things like roughness, the minor mode, and things like this, and it is actually pretty effective. And effective means that you can listen to the sound for 2 seconds and be able to know, or to say, okay, this is probably in this quadrant, or this sound is certainly sadder than the other one. And
have you seen that animation where they play like Mozart, part of Mozart's Requiem? and they put the harmonic vocabulary, but there's also this animated figure that's like frowning when it's it's an A minor, I think, and he's frowning, and then when it goes to 5, he's kind of excited, and there's a 5 of 5, and he's anticipating, so it's kind of in that zone a little bit, huh? I'm curious about this harmonic vocabulary. We're about, if we want to keep this around 15 minutes, we're just about there, but I did have one other question is, have you thought, you used the term ecology. One of the types of sonifications that I'm investigating is this very ecological one. In other words, where all the parameters are going all the time, and it's almost in a game kind of environment where you move around through the sound and you sort of derive emotion from your situation in the 3D space. Is this an area that you've looked into or just thought about?
Yeah, in fact, so I think I read your article with Peter Sinclair.
Right.
I'm in road music. I was thinking I wanted to do road music for my thesis, and then I realized it had already been done.
Yeah. So he just got his doctoral. He's now Dr. Peter Sinclair.
Yeah, I know.
That's a great dissertation, by the way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have him on this series as well. I've already reached out to him, but we just haven't scheduled it. So.
Yeah, I was thinking about, and I like this, the video game metaphor is like sort of you're working around perhaps in a real environment, but there's an auditory augmentation. So you're walking and there's information that's there. You can't see it, but you're just somehow aware, and it's going on all the time. So there's not like it's contextually aware. So there's not like these awful things that happen when you're trying to have a discrete, sort of conversation or something, but also using the fact that music is something that is enjoyable and that you want to do. You want to turn music on, and so
I have this other idea of X formation where you basically we have this Connectome project where it's all this neuroscience data, but we basically are using a bandpass filter for all the parameters, and since it's a big picture of the brain, I put the Ramones, I Want to Be Sedated, and so the filter changes depending on where you are, but you're always just hearing that tune,
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's successful or not. I haven't done any user studies or any of the like real hard science kind of stuff, but it's been kind of an interesting area of investigation. Well, Mike, we're at 17 minutes, so they're going to get mad at me if I go too long. But this was fantastic, and I'll probably hit you up again because this is we certainly just scratched the surface, and this is an amazing topic, and I really look forward to reading your dissertation, which will probably be on this topic, I imagine.
Related. I'm sonification and emotion, so.
Yeah, that's where you're working. Yeah.
Yeah.
Florian was very enthusiastic about your work, and that's why I sent on the invite. I wasn't aware of it before. I think I might have read the article, but I didn't, click it.
Okay. So it was a pleasure to talk to you too, and always it's great to have met you. So
and Creative Disturbance, you should check out the other things.
I will,
and we'll have for the listeners, we'll have all the pointers to examples and also pointers to the PDFs of his writings if you want to read the articles as well. Okay. Bye for now, Mike.
Okay. Bye.
Sound in beta.